Hey, to whoever may need this nugget of encouragement, things will be alright, so quit your worrying. I get it, the odds seem stacked back against the wall, but even consider it such, know you'll stand tall. Sat and watch from the sidelines, one too many times, wicked games we play, make me wanna lose my mind. Found solitude, knowing it'll be over soon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Contrary to the Culture. I am your host, Jaysa King. This podcast has been created solely to explore the depths of cultures around the nation. We will have interviews from experts, challenge the mainstream ideas surrounding the cultural identities in our society, as well as make sure we touch on misconceptions we have about. All episodes are brought to you on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. on all major podcast platforms, not to mention my website, audacityofwomen.com. There, under the podcast tab, you can find transcripts from every episode. In order to know how we're doing, I need you to show us some love. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, comment your experiences, but most importantly, turn on your notifications so you don't miss any of the episodes. Now that that's done, let's jump into our episode. All right. Welcome, guys, back to another episode of Contrary to the Culture. As you know, we are doing education season this month. We will be doing another amazing educator that will be able to introduce herself. I will not give too much. I'll let her do all of that. But this episode is talking about learning styles for our minority youth. We're going to be talking about different points within the classroom, outside of the classroom, and how we as a community can play a part in our students' lives when it comes to our learning styles. Okay. So without further ado, thank you so much, Silver, for coming on the episode with me and doing this.
Yes, no problem. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation to share this space with you.
Yes, of course. I appreciate you. So before we get started, please tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and your expertise.
Yeah, so I'm Silver again. I hold a few hats in education. My 9 to 5, I am the Senior Director of Middle School Curriculum and Instructions for a charter network here in Detroit. All things academics for the middle schools within that network. So instruction, instructional coaching, curriculum, all of those things. I also have my own business called Classroom Clapback. And within Classroom Clapback, I say it is my best attempt to clap back at a system of miseducation that doesn't do Black babies well. And so I do that through curriculum development, lesson planning, lesson resource design, professional development for educators. It is very much so rooted on our belief that Black child genius is alive and well. And so we are trying to create and cultivate spaces for genius and joy in the learning and education of Black children. And then I also have a nonprofit with my family, SDM2 Project Education. And we are doing, our efforts is to grow and build our communities by centering youth in the needs of families. And so part of that is within education and providing resources to support children in being able to access education, even if that comes from things like making sure their nutrition and that food is available in the home, because that impacts their education as well. So looking at the child holistically to provide those resources for them in education.
I love that. So it's definitely open to say that you have all the expertise for this topic in particular. So
Thank you.
So before we get started, I would love for you to give some more explanation on learning styles, right? So with you working in classrooms, especially middle school, what are the common learning styles that you would see?
So learning styles, when people talk about it, they're usually thinking about if a child is more of an auditory learner, if they learn better by hearing things. Are they visual? Do they need to see a representation? Maybe they need to see a graphic. Are they kinesthetic learners? Do they learn by doing things? So this might be that hands-on learners, like I need to create something to demonstrate that I know it. I might need to move around to learn the things. Maybe I remember something better if I have a hand signal to go along with it. That's an example of what a kinesthetic learner might be like. So there are a variety of different ways in which to learn. I think it's also in terms of we're thinking about learning styles and particularly thinking about the communities that we support. So as an educator in Detroit, 90% of the students that I have supported across I'm now in my 12th year, of education have been Black students, Black students from Detroit. So that is a learning style, right? So though it might not fall under the standard ones that you would learn about if you were in an education class, but culturally responsive teaching teaches us that the way students learn is based on what are their interests,
right?
What is their community language? What is the culture in which they are immersed in, and leveraging that to support their learning. So how do we grab students? Well, we grab students by thinking about them as the learning tool, as the vehicle. So when I think about for classroom clapbacks, so when I do professional developments for teachers, there are 3 things that I look at. I call them schema, skills, and Sankofa. So schema is what we usually call, it's the best way to say like background knowledge, leveraging what students already know. I like to look at it as in what genius do students bring to the classroom? What do they love before they even met you? What makes them and their communities beautiful before they stepped into the classroom? That is a part of their learning style that we leverage. So the skills are the things that they need to learn to be academically successful, right? They need to be able to cite evidence, things like that. And then Sankofa is an African term that means go back and fetch it. So reaching back into our heritage, reaching back into our histories. So how do we pull and leverage the beauty of their histories, the beauty of those that came before them in terms of helping them to be able to learn and grapple with something, going back and showing that their heritage, you've always been brilliant, you've always been genius, and using that to help them learn. So learning styles, they do have the typical things you learn in school, but I think of it a little differently as I approach this work and culturally responsive work, and particularly culturally responsive work for Black students.
I love that, culturally responsive. I absolutely love the way that's described. It definitely has come up in a couple episodes that I've done when it comes to education and our students. When I had these conversations too, it has come up that we are missing out on our Black educators. Would you support that? Do you think that we need more Black educators in our systems to help our students?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Black males, the number is even lower, with only about 3% of educators being Black men. Not that it's super high for Black women, but it's even lower for Black men. The data and the research all shows us that when students, period, not even just Black students, when students, period, have Black educators, they are actually more likely to show academic gains. They are more likely in terms of graduation. So rates improve for all students, but particularly Black students, when they do have opportunities to have a Black teacher. So there's a lot of reasons that have gone into why we see not as a disproportionate number of Black teachers in relation to the amount of Black students that fill up K-12 public education. I would say a part of that was the backlash to Brown versus Board of Education. Once it came out that schools had to be integrated, a lot of white families were like, my child is not going to be taught by a Black teacher. And Black teachers were en masse getting pink slipped, right? Black teachers en masse lost their jobs. And we have never really recovered from that in the shifts of who is in front of students. And so now we're seeing that Black college students are going into education at about the same rate as their white counterparts, but they're not finishing at the same rate. They're changing careers, they're switching. We're also seeing struggles in passing certification tests, especially here in Michigan, where I am at, for Black teachers who actually enter the classroom as full certified teachers, not like long-term subs and things like that. So there are various different barriers into us seeing more Black teachers. So part of our work has to be creating these pipelines to be able to get more Black teachers, period, but definitely in front of Black students.
Wow. So this is going to go on a tangent, guys. We haven't even gotten to the questions I have for this topic, but I have another question. So my background, I did get my master's in elementary education, but because I had my son, I couldn't get my licensure, which is neither here nor there, but that was my obstacle. However, I did teach in the classroom for a few years before that happened. So when I think about people not finishing, I am curious, what have you come across to where people aren't finishing? Like, that's my example, but I wonder why, get that far and not.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of the same reasons that we might see black college students not finishing, period, right? Like, so this is a cycle in terms of what are educational attainment within the K-12 space. How many of our students are graduating from high school, entering into college, and are actually have the skills that they need to be college ready, right? So I think that's something standard across the board, and while it's taking us longer to get there. Once we get there, a lot of us are having to take remedial classes that are not counted for credit. So we're in longer, we're accumulating more debt. So there are various reasons why that is the case. So I attended Michigan State University for my undergrad, and I helped to launch a campaign while I was there called Greater Than 56, because only 50% of Black students were graduating even within 6 years of coming into Michigan State University, right? So there are already tons of barriers that come with us making sure that we get to college and we actually get through college. And then as we have these other barriers in terms of teaching specifically, depending on the program that you're going through, if you've got that year of student teaching that you are teaching for free, essentially you are working full time with no money, and you still have to live and pay your bills, right? Like these like that are barriers to being able to complete the programming. A lot of people aren't going into education, period, right now, right? Like, so there's a teacher shortage across the board. When COVID came out, we said the same thing. When white folks get colds, we get COVID. So the same thing, like if it's barriers that's causing y'all not to enter education, there are even higher barriers for us entering education, sustaining education, and completing to actually come into the school. And then when we get there, 50% of new teachers quit within the first 5 years, right? Like, so there are so many different barriers to hinder us actually getting trained, developed, strong, productive, quality teachers in front of students, period. And so Black people, because we are marginalized in so many other areas, we're holding even a greater burden of that.
You know what? I have more questions, but I'm gonna save it for our panel. But let's get back in. Let me get back on task. Okay, so again, this topic is on learning styles with minority youth. So one of my first questions is going to be the effects of Ebonics, right? As of now, I believe that our kids are more fluent in Ebonics than they are the academic standard on grammar. And I'm curious, when it comes to working with teachers of color, do you think that we present more in Ebonics and take away the need to understand the basic grammar within society? I think I can.
So I am more fluent in Ebonics, Black language, Black English than I am in standard American English, right? Like, so I want to make sure that we recognize that Ebonics is actually a full language in and of itself. It comes with its own grammar stylings. Like, there are ways that you can be trying to speak, as I just said, be trying to speak Ebonics and speak it incorrectly. Right. So even the proverbial be, as we do, I be, I been, like those things are part of the grammatical styles of Ebonics and Black language. I would look in, if you are a listener, looking into the work of Dr. April Baker Bell, as well as the work of Dr. Geneva Smitherman. They do a lot of work in terms of Black language and particularly the educational space. Ann Arbor, Michigan, as well as like Oakland, California, are some people that are some school districts that have looked to how do we recognize it as a language, and then what does that look like in our school space. So I think if you are a English language arts teacher, which was my background, ELA teacher, is one, recognizing that there is beauty and genius and brilliance in Ebonics and Black language and Black English. You have to think about the fact that you had enslaved people who were being robbed from their language and still managed to hold on to some of its language stylings. So when we look at Ebonics, a lot of those things mirror some of the same grammatical stylings in African languages. Right. So instead of it being stolen, they held on to something else and combined it with the English language that they were given, and they created this language. So one, first and foremost, you have to recognize that that this is beautiful, that this language that you own, this is genius and what you created. And in many ways, sometimes English language is like a little excessive, and Black language is just more efficient in a lot of ways. So even as I say, like, there's nothing more artful than that of Black language. So we should definitely be in the ELA space, English language art space. But then it's still like, how do we still engage in teaching students that essentially are like a second language,
Right.
in that case? Because I can remember being in undergrad and trying to write papers and thinking, like, how do I translate what's here
Right.
into standard American white language English? Because English here is not the same if I go to England, right? So how do I translate what I'm trying to say? So I think if we have to begin with seeing it as brilliant and not like a lower level, like bad language. So starting there, and then we can think about, like, how do we engage students as learning of a second language? I will look also into Jamila Lyscott. She has a poem where she talks about being trilingual as she speaks standard American English, patois, and Ebonics at the same time, right? Like, so how do we look at engaging our multilingual students that are often Black students to help them engage in what is the stylings of standard American language? So not looking at them as one is better than the other, but looking at them as both ways to speak and engage in a language.
I love that. I've never heard it described as multilingual. And that is so interesting because I do know the background of Ebonics, that it is a full language. It is a full history, all of it. But when you step into that space of education, it is something that needs to be taken out of the classroom completely. And again, as you pointed out, some of us are very fluent, and that's okay. But you have to understand how to translate the information they need to learn into a way that they can receive. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that's very important to bring up. We have a lot of Spanish-speaking students that have a full set of teams in order to make sure that they're learning, but we don't for our Ebonics learning students. So I think that's very important to point out. Thank you for that. When I talk about cultural traits, what would you say you have seen amongst our minority communities from generation to generation? Has it shifted at all? Do you think that there is something that is being taught in the home more often than not that's translating into the classroom?
I mean, it's definitely shifts. Like, if you look at generations in general, Generation X versus if you were teaching a millennial student versus a Gen Zer versus Gen Alpha, which is the youngest of students that we have right now, they are all very different groups because they are living in very, very different times. So even some of the things you have to think about in education, so my first year teaching was 2013.
Okay.
Those set of students are engaging in a very different landscape even than the students now entering the 2014 school year, where AI is a thing now, and thinking about that, right? Like, we didn't go to school and everybody had access to the level of technology that we have now, that you can get it at your fingertips quickly. Like, so because the world is changing, there is changes that are within the students that are being put in front of us. Right. Generation Z is very much so, I say they the ones that's going to change the world because they have a very strong pursuit of justice and what is right and what is wrong. So that comes up even into the classroom. And there are some things that that millennials and Gen Xers wouldn't push back on that Gen Z would, that Gen Z are, because of their pursuit of justice. So I think we have to think about, like, as we are constantly, the more you teach in education, you're going to have to evolve with what are the needs of today, what makes this generation, what is the genius of this generation, because their genius is different than the genius of the last one. So you have to be able to adapt to that. I know a lot of times we get into conversations of this generation and we usually say this generation as a pejorative, right? Like, there's something wrong with these new age and we had it better then, which is like every group had its own set of issues, own set of difficulties. So we just have to think about, like, what is the genius and joy of this particular generation and how do we adapt? And so that means that we are not the experts at all things, because I have never lived life as a Gen Zer. I have never a day. I do not know what it is like to live life as a young person under the rates of depression that we see now that we have not seen before, and mental illness the way we have. I don't know what it is like to live that. So how do we look at the students as experts at their lives,
Right.
like, and engage them in that space? Just because we are the adults in the room does not mean we are the smartest people in the room. We might be smart in terms of we've mastered the academic skills.
Right.
You know you and your groups and how you move way better than I do. So we have to do a lot of listening. And so you mentioned even in terms of what's happening in families that is different. And we would say for sure the shape of family looks different, because again, everything looks different. So how do we bring and engage families into the table a lot differently?
Right.
It's also important to realize that parents always parent out of their trauma.
Right.
Don't intend to do it, but all parents, regardless of your generation, my mom parented out of maybe her trauma, and her mom parented, like, they all do it. And so there are even certain traumas that their parents might have as it relates to school and education. And so how do we create not just safe spaces in our schools for our students, but for our parents as well, and see them as partners in a place that might not have felt good for them as a child? This was not a good place for me. I might not have been the star student. I might have been a struggling reader as a student. So how do I now feel safe in a place that might have caused me trauma, right? Like, so engaging and thinking about how we can bring families in, and how do we make this to be a communal space, a community of learners. That means not just the kids, but their parents, because we are in partnership with them. We're not working on opposite sides.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I think that is something that, while I taught, that was a huge conflict. A lot of the students' parents either had no relationship with their teachers, or they just had no desire to learn any of the skills that they were learning. I remember getting all the complaints about the new way that math was being taught, which we all agree. Math changes every 2 seconds. It's frustrating. But I think when you step in front of those parents and you provide them those resources and let them know, I get it. I'm from a different generation as well. I'm just as confused, but we're going to get through it together. They are more encouraged. They are more engaged in what their student is learning, instead of being more passive and aggressive towards the teachers because they feel like it's your fault. So I definitely agree, when it comes to that community, you have to be willing to open those doors. When it comes to guiding a family, and you want to break those habits, those same habits of not feeling so aggressive towards education in general, what are some steps that you would take to let them know, like, this is what I'm doing? You kind of broke it down, but I'm curious, when it comes to, let's say, for example, a family that, we'll use the math as example, grew up with one way, doesn't understand how to break down this education system anymore to teach their child at home, decides to just let it go, let them figure it out at school. Now their student is failing the same skills. What would be your approach with that parent up into the child?
So I think one, I know communication is cliche, but like, definitely communication needs to be at the forefront. The only time the parent shouldn't only hear from you, and it shouldn't be the first time they hear from you, when there is a problem. Right. Like, same way, we know you walk in a room, you're supposed to speak to everybody in the room. Like, that's just it. Like, because you're in the space, speak. So because you have entered into their lives by having their children, speak, and don't wait to speak when it's a complaint. How do you have spaces to engage parents in knowing what their children are learning and should be learning? So whether that is something just as newsletters actually go home, that you're just communicating, this is what we are learning. How are you creating space for, if it is a math thing and there is a particular math standard that so if you're 5th grade and you are engaging in fractions, or even in your 5th or 6th grade classes, you're engaging in work of fractions, decimals, so on and so forth. Parents are struggling with that. Okay, that's fine. We are going on Instagram and Facebook Live. We are going to show how to do this from, 7 to 7:30, we are going live on this to engage families in that. We're going to have the back to school nights. We're going to have the curriculum nights. We're going to have the space where we're bringing them in. We are inviting you into our classrooms, and we're going to leverage the genius of our parents as well. Mm-hmm. So that parent might not know anything about the new math, because don't ask me to teach a math class. I don't know how to teach her, and like I don't know the stuff.
Yeah.
But that parent might be an amazing cook, and I am inviting them into the community because they might lead an after school program, or I might be doing a project on we're learning about fractions. So I'm going to bring that amazing cook, that amazing baker into my classroom, and I'm going to, hey, we got this lesson, we're learning about fractions. It really relates to baking. Can you come in and lead us through baking some cookies, and we can use that to teach the fractions, right? Like, how are we bringing them into the spaces? They are adults.
Right.
The parents are not children. So it should not be us all that we are trying to teach them. We're trying to tell them, we're trying to get them together. That's a full grown adult.
Right.
And approach them and think of them in that way, that I need to educate you and fix you. Like, how can we partner in this? You love this child before I even met this child, right? Keeping that in the forefront of their mind. They love their child the best, and they've loved them the longest. They'll love them even when you are no longer their teacher. So bringing them in, communicating over communicating, but also allowing them to come into this space and share the space. Even if it's, I need some stuff laminated. Mom, you mind helping laminate the stuff? Like, invite them in.
Yeah.
We will see that parents are more likely to do it when we extend it to them, because they may not know how to come into the space unless you invite them into it. And then that helps to build those relationships more.
Ooh, I love those. Those are absolutely amazing examples. I hope some teachers listening will definitely use that, because I think that those are new. A lot of the times when working in schools, you have the vets that stick to their same routines, their same methods. And if parents take it, they don't. It is what it is. But it's always refreshing to hear the different ways that we can utilize our community and help our students. So I definitely, again, appreciate you with that. That's very amazing. Where do you believe accountability should be placed when it comes to bridging the gap between our minority community and the white agenda?
Okay, so tell me more when you say on the white agenda, so I can make sure I answer this in the right way.
I've actually asked this question before, and I guess I'll start it with, do you believe that there is an agenda when it comes to academics against our students of color, whether that is their inability to learn being put in that category, the type of curriculum that's being taught that we know may not be received the same way for our children of color, and again, going back to the types of teachers that we have in the classrooms presenting this curriculum, do you think that there is an agenda in that?
I mean, racism and white supremacy is the foundation of America, right? Like, we live in a country where it was literally a crime punishable by death for Black people to read. We live in a country that some of our original schools were boarding schools for the indigenous population of this country, in which they were literally stolen, placed into these schools, and forced to assimilate into white culture. So that meant cutting your hair, that meant losing your language, losing your traditional clothing, right? And so we continue to see these various things of attacks of education for people of color. We are a nation where eugenics was a very real thing, and that there was beliefs about the intelligence or lack thereof of Black people. They would look at our skulls and say that, see, their skulls are different, and, you know, they know less. And so early eugenics, those that believed in the inherent academic and intellectual insufficiency of Black people are those that originally created standardized tests like the SAT, right? Like, so those were founded off of these beliefs of Black inferiority. So that is the bread and butter of America.
Right.
None of those things have changed, and how in which we shape and create our school systems, those people are still existing and making a lot of the big decisions. And we are in an age right now where a false narrative of what critical race theory is is being lifted up and is being seen as the boogeyman. And so now the level of book bans that we are experiencing and whose history is actually seen as a valuable history to be taught. Like, we are in a hyper era of trying to gut as many, as much of showing Black people as human as possible in the learning space. And so I think the way in which I view education, I believe that within the educational space, it is our best opportunity to be able to address the multiple intersecting oppressions that Black people face.
Right.
As one individual, I cannot fix everything that we experience in healthcare. I cannot fix environmental racism and fix the mass incarceration and it's so many things that we are impacted with as Black people in this country, rooted in racism and white supremacy. But in the classroom, I believe that I have the opportunity to equip students with the academic skills they need to get seats at the table, but also the critical consciousness to be able to create the proper shifts once they get to the table to make changes within our world and for our communities. So in the classroom, I don't just need you to master RI.1. I don't just need you to master these standards. I also need to equip you with some critical consciousness so that you can go and shake up the things that as one person we cannot do on our own. So if you were a teacher in Miss Moore's classroom, I built woke babies. It was very evident that you had me as a teacher because they were all ready to fight the power at all times, right? Yes. So you ain't got to be like as, riling them up as I was, but you should be able to equip students with critical consciousness so that they can be civically and socially engaged and so they can fight against these things that are fighting them. But that means that you need to give them the academic skills too, because I'm not about to just teach you that racism is real and then I don't give you any of the tools to fight against the racism that you are now aware of. Like, you got to be able to do the reading and the writing and the counting and all the other things to actually fight against these things that are fighting you. So it is a both and. Get them skills in and make sure that they have the mindset needed so that they can fight against all of these things that we're seeing and we will continue to see. In a lot of areas, we're going to see after November just to what degree we are going to see a lot of these issues increasing.
I know that's right. I need to go back. I need a class. But before we end this episode, I do want to ask. So you work with charter schools. I worked in a public school. I am curious, what made you choose a charter school over a public school? Obviously, I know a few things, but I am curious on your perspective.
So I am not at all a person that has any viewpoint on any I hold no belief that a charter is better than a public or vice versa. Okay. I think it is on the basis of who is in the building, who's in the leadership, who are the teachers, and that is what makes the difference. So I didn't necessarily choose a charter school.
Okay.
That really is just how it happened. So yeah, it was not a particular move that I said I did not want to teach in a public school. Absolutely not. I think that and charters are like public adjacent, right? So it's not a completely different world, though there are some definite differences. I just think we just in all spaces, like we are all after the same thing and after the same proof. I do believe public education, whether it's a public school or charter school, is what we need. That is the way forward. I'm here for public education and away from the privatizing of education and away from even the vouchers that come with a lot of the public and charter world, but that's a whole other conversation. I know we're trying to wrap up on this school choice thing that we are being thrown. That is not the prettiness that they are fashioned to be. But yeah, no, it was not any political choice. It was just how the cookie crumbled.
Yeah, and I love that. Okay, then let me readjust my question because you kind of touched on it, but I am curious again. When you are looking at those positions, you said who's in the building. What are those expectations you have for the position to make that final decision?
So I tend to be if I'm thinking about, I've only worked in a couple of different spaces in this time in the school, and I'm very upfront and very silver at all times. So at the interview, you're going to know before I leave there that I am a firm believer in justice and I am all about Black people. And so I'm going to let you know that up front.
Mhm.
And if that makes you uncomfortable, then that's not a place that I want I want to be. That's important to me, to be in a space where we do believe and genius of our students, and we do want to create spaces for their joy, and that's the bottom line. Like, I don't care about how many resources that we have. I don't care if we got the finance of things. I don't care about the level of work. That none of those things make any difference to me. I just need to be in a place where you believe in this, the genius of our students, and that we need to have them have strong academic skills, but also high levels of critical consciousness. And if you don't believe it, that you get out of my way so that I can do what I need to do. Right. That's really what the main thing that matters to me. Do I have the access and ability and freedom to be able to create and build in those ways? Like, that's what's important to me. And like I said, I'm very clear. I'm not hiding behind those closed doors on who Silver is in the classroom. And so it's up for you to decide if this is a place where that is okay. And if that's not, then I bid you and your well. And I hope that your students are able to still get that from some place when they leave you.
I love that. And I love being able to close with that, especially when it comes to new teachers, understanding that you do not have to go in with this facade, that you can be yourself, that you can, demand that you are accepted for who you are and the ways that you were inspired to teach. And I think that's something that's very important. And I wish I had it for myself, not to make it a selfish conversation, but it's huge, especially in our community. We are conditioned to believe that we have to fit this packaging in order to be accepted in this world. And that's not always true. It's more inspirational for us to come out as who we are and our goals and our purpose, and not feeling as though we have to dim our light to do that. So I definitely commend you for stepping out and doing exactly that. So I'm definitely excited for this episode to come out, y'all. But
we have to model that for our students. I'm sorry, we got to model that for our students. We can't come in and talk about you beautiful, you genius, you all this, and then we don't show up as our beautiful and genius selves in the first place. So even how we live is a full lesson plan in and of itself.
Yes, and they see it. And that is definitely the crazy part. Our kids see it. They know exactly when they need to be themselves and when they need to put on an act. And that's not what we want to do. And that's definitely something that I'm trying to put together on my own stuff for my nonprofit, is curriculum individuality. They are not the same. They are learning these crazy things. And that was the whole episode, y'all. I got distracted. That was the whole episode. It's about these learning styles and understanding that our kids need that differentiation beyond what is told by the state. They need to understand that you are special, you have a purpose. And like you pointed out, you may be a social justice mogul, but on the other side, you may just want to be at home raising an amazing family to go out and make these changes. But if we don't identify that within our classrooms with our kids, they're not going to have that full potential and understand that they are special, they are brilliant, they are amazing. So again, I appreciate you and your time. I really do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I am. But before you go, please tell us how we can connect with you outside of this episode.
Yeah, so I'm Silver again. I am Silver Danielle in the social media world. You can find Classroom Clapback. We are on now. I ain't good with updating stuff on my business page. I ain't even gonna lie to you, but they exist. So we got Classroom Clapback on Instagram and Facebook, classroomclapback.com. Silver Danielle for my personal page on Facebook as well as Instagram. I'd love to, whoever is listening to this, I'd love to connect with you in real time.
Yes, I definitely appreciate you, Silver. You guys already know every Tuesday, God willing, is my goal to make sure I am posting. It is education season at Audacity of Women, so definitely make sure you stay tuned. From August to October, y'all, I have some jam-packed things for everyone to, again, engage in our students and engage in community. So this is Contrary to the Culture. I am Jason. Until next time, thank you guys. Bye. All right, that was our episode. Thanks so much for listening to Contrary to the Culture. Again, I am your host, Jasa King. You can find full show notes from today's episode at audacityofwomen.com under the podcast tab. Let's connect on Instagram at Just Jasa Podcast. There you will find clips from our various segments and more information about yours truly. If you're loving the podcast, I'd be so honored if you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a review. Until next time.
Ever need a boost, count on me for the 1-2. Trouble don't last when the tough get going. Baby, all we do is win, so show me my opponent. Adversity, doubt, stress, could care less, cause how we handle those like an S on our chest. Super proud of how we held it